Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, people of all fandoms, welcome to the Ferret and Raccoon podcast, episode 138. I am your one and only host for this podcast, the Angry Raccoon, and we're back for the first podcast of April. Coming off the heels, I'm going to immediately mention COVID-19, coronavirus. We're still in the midst of it, especially over in England, and it doesn't seem to be slowing down in terms of self-isolation, in terms of it, I guess, being considered a pandemic, but I refuse not to record this podcast. There's no reason for me to stop doing it as of right now. Thankfully, I have my health and so does my family, and hopefully all of you out there are staying safe, and hopefully all of your friends and family are doing well. That is my biggest wish for everyone listening to said podcast. But yeah, things have been quite crazy over the last few weeks. I think things are kind of slowing down in terms of things actually happening, being announced, being shown off. I think the general kind of, I guess, reality of the situation is kind of set in for a lot of people, especially over in England. It doesn't seem as panicked around the streets. I do go outside, but it's just mainly to look after my grandparents because they cannot leave the house, so I need to do things for them. But I'm only really out for a few minutes. Luckily enough, they live close to me, so I don't feel like I'm risking my life to essentially get them things they need. And no, I do not come into contact with them. It is left outside their door or posted through the letterbox. But yeah, things have been interesting over the last few weeks. I mean, it's kind of strange that although most people have been kind of keeping themselves occupied with like media and other means of things, I know some people are still working, still going to work. I had a little bit of work a few weeks ago. I headed up to London as well. London, the capital of this country, and it is a ghost town. It's actually quite spooky. It did remind me a little bit of 28 Days Later to some extent. Like, it wasn't that empty, but I mean, I was literally at Piccadilly Circus and Trafalgar Square, and there is nobody there. I took one photo, and yeah, it's quite eerie. I mean, if it wasn't for the fact that it was, I guess, technically deadly to be outside, it would be a really cool time to like shoot your music video or shoot your short film, especially if you're doing a zombie apocalypse one. But yeah. Interestingly enough, I am kind of in the midst of watching and doing a lot of things, so nothing's really been finished. I've kind of just decided to be watching all these shows and stuff, but I'm kind of in the middle of them. So I don't necessarily want to talk about a TV series where I'm only 7 episodes in. I'd rather finish it, even though they are quite long series. But in terms of the things that I definitely did do and have been doing, I finally got around to playing Resident Evil 2, the remake. I've beaten this game about 5 times now, and I absolutely love it, unexpectedly. I've kind of got both scenarios, both playing as Leon S. Kennedy and Claire Redfield. I've kind of got their playthroughs, their runs kind of stuck in my head now. I've kind of got the routine. I know how to optimize things. I'm kind of going for the best possible ranks, going for the S rank. And, you know, I've really mastered the game to some extent. I wouldn't say I'm perfect. I'm not about to start doing, you know, speed runs and, you know, trying to beat it in under like, you know, an hour and stuff like that. But I'm enjoying it. I really love it. I'm currently trying to get all the trophies or achievements in it, as well as generally trying to S rank every, I guess, major mode. Hardcore, is quite tricky to do so, and I don't think I will do it on every version. But by the time you hear this, I would have essentially got every collectible in the game. But I'm really, really liking this game. In terms of Resident Evil 3 Remake, I have not bought it. I'm not going to be playing it for a while. Given certain things coming up, I kind of can't afford to drop the money for both that and Doom Eternal, as well as a few other games, because obviously I don't know what's going to happen in the coming weeks, and there are a few things that I still got to pay that money's got to go towards. I'm technically still working and I'm technically still getting paid, but you know, I don't know what's going to happen. So it's best not to be buying any new video games for, you know, £50 starting price. I'm going to have to wait. So I have officially just not been bothering with Twitter. I'm not even really looking at any recommendations in terms of YouTube. I'm being very careful when it comes to going on websites and stuff, because I do not want to see anything on this game. Because I cannot wait. Doom Eternal as well. So that's kind of where I am at the moment. I guess we can move on to things that happened over the last fortnight. As you would expect it, no one's really revealing or showcasing anything new, understandably. There's no point really trying to drum up hype during these times, especially films. Film trailers are just non-existent, and there really weren't any that I really cared about, except for the one I'm going to talk about slightly later on. But the first thing I wanted to talk about is the fact that Albert Uderzo, I believe that's how you say his name, Uderzo, essentially the co-creator and illustrator of the Asterix comics, the very famous and iconic Asterix and Obelix Adventures comics, unfortunately passed away aged 92, which is a really sad passing to hear someone who has made a very iconic kind of like symbol and character within comics, especially in Europe and France, which is where the series originated from. It was particularly upsetting for me to hear of his passings because, along with the Tintin comics, the Asterix comics essentially got me into comics, as well as like reading more at a younger age, because when I was very young, I really didn't like reading. I kind of struggled with reading. You know, I couldn't necessarily just read a book that had no pictures. I mean, much like a lot of children, but I'm talking or at about, because usually when you get to about 7, 8, you can kind of start reading chapter books. For me, I always struggled, not necessarily because I found it boring, but because I just struggled with reading, simply put. And I do have a lot of respect for this series because it mainly kind of exposed me to more comics and more series outside of English-speaking language. I knew of Tintin before the Asterix comics, and then I also learned about a few other things like the Asterix series. So it's very sad because I have such a personal connection to this series, and it's a shame to have like the last of the two kind of creators behind it kind of pass away. The original creator, I think he passed away in 1977, I believe. So yeah, it was just a shame, and I wanted to mention, if you've never seen this comic series, I mean, you've most likely seen the characters because they've had a lot of media exposure. There's video games, there's both live action and animated films. There was, I believe, a TV series as well. They're quite popular and they're quite iconic. I'd be very surprised if you haven't seen them, especially if you I guess delve into animation, video games, and all the other things I've just mentioned. So that was one thing I wanted to talk about and kind of bring up, which was quite sad. Kind of staying with animation and keeping it quite positive for the most part. The next thing we have to talk about is quite interesting, and that is essentially the anime streaming website RetroCrush, which has just launched as of the 30th of March. And essentially what this website is that it is essentially going to be streaming for free with ads 70s, 80s, and 90s era anime, which is pretty cool because they've already said they've got a good selection of good iconic and maybe not so well known series, as well as some films with more to come. And I just think to myself, this is such perfect timing for anime fans, you know, especially those who are into the old school anime or just kind of getting into it. Anime is pretty damn popular, and I think with a lot of new modern day series is really kind of becoming more and more how should I put it, more viable for people to get into anime. When I think of accessible animes in today's time, I think of Beastars, because that isn't really your conventional anime with main protagonist with the sword and he's the hero. It's very much a relatable, down-to-earth series. I mean, it kind of almost is like the Japanese equivalent in terms of how it's made and how it's developed and kind of progresses. Is a bit like BoJack Horseman to some extent. Likeable characters, relatable characters, fantastic story, you know, just fantastic, simply put. Except I think Beastars is 100% a lot different, but it does kind of have similarities in terms of just how well it's made and how well it's executed. Shows like that I think of, but I know a lot of people are getting into older animes, especially now that some of these older animes are kind of being remade and kind of seen as classic icons. So I'm pretty happy about the fact that this website has been launched, especially given the fact that COVID-19 is preventing people from going inside. So I see no reason not to essentially give this website a try. I mean, it's free. If you don't mind ads are pretty much everywhere. And I mean, they might even introduce a, you know, subscription-based site. You can actually download the app for this on pretty much everything from like Apple to Android to like a few other platforms. I don't know if it's on, let's say, like Nintendo Switch or PS4. I'm sure it's going to come eventually. If not, just open up your laptop and watch it. But I'm really happy about this. I mean, it's a really good idea because a lot of these animes from this era were essentially a different beast, and they deserve a lot of respect for essentially being like the originators of what we have now, you know, or essentially setting the standard, or how else should I put it? Essentially being the building blocks or the backbone to what the industry is right now, because these series, is mainly the ones they kind of promote in their trailer and in the poster, are the reason why the anime industry is the way it is and the reason why it's changed. I don't know why I'm getting so caught up on these words. I just get too passionate when I talk about anime, I guess. But you know what I mean? I think it's a good idea. I mean, it's history. I mean, I'm glad that it's being archived in a modern way for the most part, because a lot of these series don't even have like modern day like DVD/Blu-ray releases, which is a bit of a shame. I mean, I do give 100% props to all the companies out there that are essentially releasing the newer series on DVD so that people over here in the West can watch them, you know, a good few months after they air, instead of it being like the whole couple of years, or if at all. I mean, once a series finishes airing in Japan, you can guarantee that someone like Manga Entertainment or I'm trying to think of the name, like Vits Media, or not Vits Media, sorry, MVM, or All the Anime are going to essentially, you know, pick it up and kind of put it out on DVD, which I 100% respect. I would just like to see them release like some slightly older stuff, because, you know, that stuff deserves respect at the end of the day. I would hopefully love that when they do add more animes, hopefully we start to see some more like 60s, maybe even 50s era if they can get the rights to that. I would love for that to be readily available, but I had to mention the fact that this launched, because I know some people are definitely struggling in terms of things to watch. There are plenty of really new animes right now you can go back and watch. It doesn't even have to be animes from this year, because as far as I'm concerned, there's only one anime that came out this year that is worth watching, which is a bit of a shame, but thank goodness it's as good as it is. But why not go back a couple years? Why not go back to 2019, 18? You know, watch Beastars if you've not seen that. But I'm going to be talking about things to watch and do a little bit later on in said podcast. Staying with animation one last time for the last trailer, which is quite an interesting one. And that is going to be Solar Opposites. This is essentially the trailer for the animated adult series, essentially being spearheaded by Justin Roiland and Mike Mamahan. I believe that's how you say his name. Sorry, a little bit of a tongue twister. His name is. So this is interesting. Interesting that this series existed, because it was originally shelved by Fox, and then I guess Hulu picked it up. I'm not sure if that means that the series was already made and then Hulu just acquired the rights. I know that's been happening a lot recently, especially with the last animated series I talked about on the previous podcast, Central Park. I believe that originally got shelved by Fox, and now Apple TV picked it up. Quite interesting. As Rick and Morty slowly comes to an end, which it's very obviously going to be ending very, very soon, and I think that's fine. There's nothing wrong with a show ending, you know, before it gets stale, or ending at the right time. I'm not saying Rick and Morty is either one. That's, you know, you can say whatever you want about Rick and Morty. I know people have a love-hate relationship with it. Personally, I enjoy Rick and Morty. Do I think it's the greatest show ever made? No. Do I think it's the smartest show ever made? No. Do I think it's well written and well structured? Absolutely. But we are seeing the next wave of adult animated series, you know, kind of coming, hoping to essentially cement themselves as like, or with the big players, you know, next to shows like The Simpsons, Bob's Burgers, or once again, BoJack Horseman. And we have Solar Opposites, which is interesting because it unfortunately has some similarities to Rick and Morty, to which I would have loved a different style to tell the two apart, because immediately you see it and you think Rick and Morty. Even if I hadn't told you this and I showed you an image, you would think that it's something to do with Rick and Morty, unfortunately. And That is kind of its only downside, but luckily the comparisons between them kind of end with character designs and the fact that it's alien sci-fi-ish. I mean, the characters themselves, they feel like a group of like likable screw-ups, and I really do like the dynamic of them trying to act normal despite being aliens in Earth world. Humans seem to know that they're aliens, which is pretty interesting because already there's no need to, hide the fact that they're aliens, which essentially already gives the series more freedom because, we can pretty much do whatever we want now with this concept, with this series, which I think is quite possibly the strongest element of the series compared to Rick and Morty, where with Rick and Morty, you know what to expect. An episode that takes place just in the house of the main characters would seem weird or odd to fans. Fans expect adventures, they expect science fiction, they expect disturbing or violence to some extent. With this series, if they want to have a whole episode take place in the neighborhood with like wacky shenanigans happening, they can do that. If they want a whole episode, as they tease in the trailer, with zombies, they can do that and it won't feel out of place, unlike with something like Rick and Morty. So they have that as one of their key elements. And honestly, I'm pretty intrigued as to see where they're going to go with this series. I mean, the plot of, alien family or, fish out of water characters trying to live on Earth or in an environment they're not used to. Yeah, it's been done before. But at least here we have the opportunity to do things that are interesting. We have, once again, that element of, everyone knows they're aliens. Obviously, what are they going to do? Given the kind of things they do, it looks like they're just going to be destroying the world for the most part. But I'm really interested to see like how the world is actually going to react to them. Are there going to be people who are just going to be like, yeah, they're cool, whatever, they're not even be bothered? Are people going to freak out? I mean, there's a clip when you see the two teenage characters, whether they are teenagers or not, I don't know. They're essentially being, bullied to some extent in school. That's an interesting concept. This series has a lot of potential, in my opinion. And I have a feeling that getting over the Rick and Morty hurdle was what could possibly hurt it. But given how good of a writer Justin Roiland is, and maybe even the fact that it is coming from the creator or co-creator of Rick and Morty, that might help it. More people might, tune in and hopefully enjoy it for the most part. But I'm incredibly hopeful for it. I think this is the right thing to do, especially when you're coming off like such a big success, because it is always hard for, to get the next hit. I mean, it's like what they say in the music industry. You can spend your whole life writing your first album, but you're only really given a year to write your second. I think they could do it. I have a feeling this is probably going to be one of those series that a lot of people sleep on, but it's secretly good. Let's just hope that Hulu keeps it around long enough for it to really achieve its potential. Yeah, and the last trailer I have to talk about is kind of an interesting one because I haven't seen the previous films and they're looking at me right now, and I was going to watch them, but I just ran out of time. And I know what you're thinking, how can you be running out of time when you're staying home all day? But, I got things to do. And that's going to be Train to Busan presents Peninsula. This is such a weird title, especially the presents, because I don't really understand how the title of this film is presenting another film, especially given that Busan is a place, and I don't understand how a train to a certain destination is presenting something else. It doesn't make sense to me. Things a bit silly. They should have just called it Train to Peninsula, in my opinion. It looks like a lot of fun though, honestly, this film. Oops, hold on. Sorry, something went wrong with my Mac. I'm not going to cut that. It looks like a lot of fun and has a great sense of like raising the stakes from the previous film, from what I know of the film, essentially. It visually feels like a zombie apocalypse landscape, which is quite cool when you like look at it and you kind of see where they've gone with the series. Sorry, excuse me. Unlike recent films, like I first think of like World War Z and how like disappointing and how fake and stupid that film was. Despite some of the lighting and the use of CGI to like create this world, it's honestly quite believable. I know there are some like elements that are a little bit silly and a bit ridiculous, like the whole arena tournament area where you got a bunch of people screaming, and I guess they're gonna fight some monster zombie or something. But the point where they're just walking around and driving around in this like wastelanded city or town is quite interesting. It works. It's believable. It's a little bit too over stylized, and I think something like 28 days or weeks later would have probably been a little bit more appropriate. But then again, the industry's changed. I don't necessarily think anyone really wants like a slower paced zombie apocalypse thing, and I highly doubt the Last of Us TV show, which is coming, is even going to kind of have that slower pace, because everyone wants violence, as shows like Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard have proven. Fans just want to see violence. But I'm honestly really interested in this film. I'm definitely going to watch the previous two films as soon as possible before I watch this one. I've just been sleeping on them for far too long, unfortunately. But I do like some of the visuals. I only watched this trailer once because I didn't want to like spoil anything for the previous films. So I really like some of the cool and like creepy visuals, like that shot with the zombies kind of like crammed into like that glass container with the like stairs that like lead up to the station. I thought that was like a really kind of horrid like visual, and that weird like mass of zombies. I can't tell if it was like just a pile of zombies or like some kind of mutated like blob of people. It looked really creepy. It looked kind of like freakish, and I'm glad they didn't really show too much of that. But honestly, this film looks like it could be, like I said, a lot of fun. I need to see the previous film, and I'm definitely going to try and watch it before next podcast. But yeah, I'm honestly liking the look of this film. Wanted to mention it because I know that a lot of people really like Train to Busan. I also know that I think Hollywood is viciously trying to remake the film in English, because obviously when a foreign language film does well, you got to remake it so that people will watch it. Hollywood is creatively bankrupt, so they just keep taking and destroying. But besides from that, let's move on to our discussion, which is more or less a talking piece. And given the fact that a lot of people are self-isolating and pretty much stuck at home, obviously, I know there is a risk that people could slowly lose their sanity in terms of not having enough things to do. So I decided to essentially put together a small collection of things that you could essentially go and watch and do to kind of keep yourself occupied, at least for the next 2 weeks, or at least until the next podcast, because if things don't essentially change, then I will do an episode 2. But essentially for this talking piece, I'm going to be calling it Finding New Things and Ways to Keep Sane During COVID-19. And I'm just basically going to list off a bunch of things that you hopefully haven't seen or done, and hopefully that can keep you occupied. First, I'm going to start with TV, and I know some of these series are going to seem like, oh yeah, seen that, it's old or whatever, but I'd imagine there are some people who just haven't watched it yet. And I've not put down a mass list of things, only because, I just want to make sure that there's enough things I can go and recommend to you later. So the first thing I want to recommend, which I know is going to seem like an obvious, oh, everyone's watched it kind of thing, but some people haven't watched it. I haven't watched it. And that's going to be Breaking Bad. If you haven't watched Breaking Bad, now's the perfect time to go watch all 5 seasons of Breaking Bad, and then you can go watch the film. That's one. Black Mirror. I know a lot of people who have only ever watched the Netflix series of Black Mirror. Those are honestly, in my opinion, some of the worst seasons of Black Mirror. The first 2 seasons are fantastic. Go and watch them, because they seem to get overshadowed by the stupidness of some of the later series, especially season 3, like episodes like Nosedive, which is just absolutely stupid. But yeah, Black Mirror, go and watch that, especially Bandersnatch, because that is technically 9 hours long if you watch every single scenario. Yes, I checked. Next, Twin Peaks. This has been on my list for a while. I'm going to recommend it to a lot of people. I'm sure some people have not seen Twin Peaks. Go watch it. I can't really say anything else, because I honestly don't know anything about Twin Peaks other than the fact that there's a film. That's all I know. I've not looked at spoilers. I don't know or get any references that are thrown to me regarding Twin Peaks. But I'm probably going to be watching it real soon, and I'm going to recommend it to you guys because I think it is interesting. Next, a show that I guess doesn't really get talked about a lot, but I think is pretty good, and that's going to be The Expanse. I think it's on 4 or 5 seasons, so you've got a lot to watch. It's essentially one of the best pieces of science fiction right now, or currently happening. Star Wars is dead. Star Trek is dead. It's all about the Expanse right now. Go watch that, because it does everything that those 2 series try to do, but miles better. Really interesting story, and yeah, just fantastic to watch. Next is a series that I know a lot of people haven't watched because it got cancelled after its 2nd season, and that is going to be Utopia from 2013. This is the Channel 4 British version of Utopia, because I know there's a few other things called Utopia. This is the TV series. Fantastic paranoia, visually striking series about utopia and different worlds and understandings and ideologies. Definitely worth watching. I'm not finished it yet, but I can recommend it because I know not a lot of people have seen it, and it's worth watching. And the last one in terms of TV series is something a little bit more relaxing, something a little bit more animated, a little bit more out there, a series that doesn't get talked about a lot, and that is going to be Polar Bear Calf. Simply put, it's about a polar bear who owns a calf. It's an animated series. It's 50 episodes long, but I do not expect you to be binge watching it. Do not binge watch Polar Bear Calf, okay? Watch an episode a day, if anything. It is relaxing, it is enjoyable, it is lovable. So I just wanted to give you a nice mixture, because I know for a fact not everyone has watched everything on this list. Next thing I'm going to quickly talk about is games. Now, I don't necessarily encourage people to go out and buy more games because, save your money, spend it on food. But if you are playing games or play games, how about going back on some of your favorite games or some of the recently bought games, and why not 100% it, platinum it, get all the trophies, get all the achievements, really challenge yourself to do something, hey, maybe you didn't finish that game. Oh, maybe you only got to do one more playthrough to get that last trophy. Why not? Really see if you can really maximize the money you spent on said game. I mean, you most likely drop 20, 30, 40 pounds on it. You might as well get your money's worth. Next thing I want to talk about is films. Now, I'm not necessarily going to recommend films because certain films can be, hard to get. I know in terms of streaming services, it's all over the place. So I don't recommend bothering with any of that. So the 2 things I'm going to mention real quick is if you live in England, you can go on all4.com, Channel 4's website, and they have a ton of films you can just watch there for free as long as you have a account, which doesn't take long. Just sign up and then you can watch these films for free. You will have to watch ads, but you can watch you can watch films. As of this recording right now, and it's going to change, you can watch films like the In-Betweeners movie, The Descent, and Mary and the Witch's Flower. All pretty good films. You can watch them right now if you've not seen them before, or you can watch them again. And they've got a ton of other films, and they're always changing the films, the rotations. The films are only up there for 12 to 30 days, so go ahead and watch them. You might as well if they're there, if you've never seen them before. Last section I want to quickly talk about is music. I'm not going to recommend albums because, people have different preferences. People don't necessarily like certain genres, so it'd be a bit defeating if I'm, recommending, rap albums and people don't like rap music. So I'm going to recommend a radio show, which, and keep in mind, this series was called this before the whole COVID-19 panic. This series is about 3 years old, and that's going to be called Stay Inside with Earl Sweatshirt and Knowledge. Radio series. Each episode is about 2 hours long. It's rapper Earl Sweatshirt and beat producer and maker Knowledge playing music, chatting about life. It's 2 hours long. Go listen to it. It's fantastic. It's chill. And that's pretty much going to wrap up the podcast. Hopefully I forgot to mention one thing before I start talking about things. With films, Red Letter Media's Best of the Worst series. Essentially what they do is they take really bad films, watch them and discuss them. Each episode is about 45 to over an hour long. If you've not watched this series and you like the idea of people talking about really, really obscure bad films, watch that series. Best of the Worst, Red Letter Media. But as I was going to say, if hopefully you've not seen any of this stuff or heard any of this stuff, So go and watch some of it if you're really struggling for content. I will have a list of a ton of other things you can go and watch and do for the next podcast, because I want to keep people sane. I want to keep people entertained. Also, I'll probably be live streaming next week. I don't know when though, so don't quote me on that. But yeah, now we can finally end this podcast with the video of the episode, and it's going to be something that's quite lengthy. Excuse me, I have no idea why I'm getting so gassy. Video of the episode is going to be the Smiling Friends pilot, Desmond's Big Day Out. Now, I should clarify, the link I'm going to put in the download link and description is to Adult Swim's official website with the official link to the episode. I cannot guarantee that everyone will be able to watch this, because Adult Swim tend to sometimes region lock their content based on who you are. So if you cannot watch the episode and you click on the link and you cannot watch the episode, because I know there's a more European, almost everyone can watch, and there's a US version. If you can't, for whatever reason, watch either links, just type in Smiling Friends pilot Desmond's Big Day Out. You can find it online. Other people have uploaded it, because I would highly recommend this pilot. It is fantastic. One of the best animated things I've seen this year so far. I'm not going to go into the plot, simply put, but it's essentially a very odd cross between something along the lines of like a really weird like Adventure Time, a little bit of like, I don't know, Rick and Morty to some extent. It's just all over the place. It's weird. I would highly recommend it. It has a tendency to be a little bit like violent, but it's 12 minutes long, and hopefully you'll enjoy it, because I really hope that it becomes a TV series, because I think it has a really good chance of being a TV series, and I want to spread the message so hopefully more people see it. If you do watch it, go tell some more people to go watch it, because I want this to become a TV series. I think Adult Swim is going to make it a TV series, because they themselves have been promoting it a lot. So that's going to be the video of the episode, and I guess I'll end this podcast right here. Hopefully you guys are staying safe. Hopefully you guys aren't going too crazy as of right now. I know we're going to beat this thing pretty much, and I think people just need to stop being as stupid. I would say personally for me, don't bother with Twitter, don't bother with Facebook. It's just a bunch of lies and stupidness. Don't read into what like the news is saying too much. They're not being given the facts, they're only twisting the truth. And yeah, don't be listening to any celebrities. I've noticed of the last few weeks, celebrities are just chatting absolute rubbish for the most part. They're losing their damn minds. I don't blame them, but I wouldn't bother paying attention to what they're saying for a while. You do you. Focus on your family and friends. Don't focus about what celebrities who are living in their luscious mansions are doing, okay? Just worry about yourself and keeping yourself nice and healthy. Make sure you're eating as much as you can, taking your vitamins, drink lots of water, think about rationing things to some extent. And if you are going to be going out to buy food, leave as early as you can, because after 12, that's when the stupid people start coming out, okay? Get to the shops before 12 is what we're going to end this podcast on. And as my dog is still going absolutely mental, I don't know if you can hear that, but the dog that currently lives in my house, he will not shut the fuck up, because there are constantly foxes going in our garden. Other dogs are barking because there are foxes going in their garden. One of the next door neighbors got a new dog, so he wants to go after that dog, and it is absolutely annoying. Not to mention all the other things that have happened this morning. I am surprised I've managed to get through this podcast with such minimal noise. But hopefully it didn't distract you, and hopefully you enjoyed this podcast. And I will end this podcast, like I always do, by saying I was the Angry Raccoon, and I will see you on the next podcast.